Well, new today, the Republican Party of Rapides Parish sent a letter to Mayor Rich Dupree and the Pineville City Council 10 days after the Pineville mayor chose to hold his resignation and remove the possibility of a special election. Colin Vidros has been tracking the latest developments. Colin, what's important about this letter?
Well, Johnny, members of the Rapides Parish Executive Committee of the Republican Party signed a letter which calls for Mayor Dupree to tender his resignation to the Secretary of State by October 17th. Now, this would trigger a special election in which the people would then vote for their next mayor instead of the City Council appointing Mayor Dupree's successor. The Pineville mayor originally announced his resignation would be effective on October 6th, but later changed his effective date to October 20th, which would not trigger a special election for mayor. According to the advocate, a special election for the citizens to vote for its next mayor would cost the city of Pineville $41,000. To offset those costs, the letter states that several local businesses have generously offered to cover those expenses. The letter also calls for the Pineville City Council to appoint an interim mayor with the appropriate skills to lead a comprehensive examination of the city's policies and procedures in collaboration with the Legislative Auditor's Office. And some Cenla signatures of note are Mayor of Ball, Gail Wilking, and Cenla State Representative Jason DeWitts. The letter ends with this message from the Rapides GOP. The people of Pineville deserve a mayor and city council leadership team that serves as a model of good governance. We also urge the council to conduct an introspective review of its own role in this crisis and determine whether its actions contributed to the breakdown in governance and the erosion of public trust. And Pineville Mayor Rich Dupree responded to this letter from the Rapides GOP. He writes in part, "I am disappointed in the committee's letter of October 13th, 2024 regarding a received breakdown in the city's governing structure. Your accusation is factually misguided and disrespectful of others who have no responsibility for the circumstances leading to or the timing of my resignation. It is common knowledge that an abbreviated surprise election cycle favors those who are positioned for a head start and that new candidates with new ideas are effectively denied a fair opportunity to compete." You can read that full statement over on our websites. Now, this comes after allegations had emerged that the mayor and his chief of staff had been involved in a relationship with a former city employee. For more information on how a special election would work if Mayor Dupree resigns before October 17th, you can head over to our website. Johnny?